The whispers started the moment Nora Ashford stepped off the stagecoach into Republic, Washington on that bitter January morning in 1884. Her larger frame silhouetted against the snow-covered mountains that towered behind the rough timber buildings. She had traveled 3 weeks from Boston to reach this mining town nestled in the wilderness, answering an advertisement for a seamstress position at the general store. And already, she could see the sideways glances from the handful of people braving the freezing air on Main Street. The wind cut through her wool coat like a knife, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the way 2 women outside the millinery shop leaned close together, their eyes fixed on her with undisguised judgment. Nora had lived with those looks her entire 22 years. Back in Boston, she had been the daughter who embarrassed her rail-thin mother at social gatherings, the young woman passed over at dances, the seamstress whose skilled fingers were valued but whose body was criticized. When her mother died last autumn, and creditors came for the boarding house they had barely kept afloat, Nora knew she needed to start fresh somewhere nobody knew her family's failures. The West promised opportunity, and Republic's advertisement had seemed like Providence. Now, standing in this frozen town with judgmental eyes already measuring and dismissing her, she wondered if she had simply traded one form of misery for another. "You must be Miss Ashford." A thin woman in her 50s approached, her face pinched against the cold and perhaps against something else. "I'm Martha Hendricks. My husband owns the general store. You're late." "The stage was delayed by snow in the mountain pass," Nora explained, her breath forming white clouds. "I apologize for any inconvenience." Martha's gaze traveled down Nora's body with barely concealed disapproval. "Well, you're here now. Come along. We've got a room for you above the store. You'll take your meals with us, and your wages will be $3 a week plus room and board. You'll work 6 days, closed Sundays for church. I expect you'll attend services with us." Nora followed Martha down the muddy, snow-packed street, acutely aware of the continuing stares. Republic was smaller than she had imagined. Just 2 main streets lined with rough wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. She counted a saloon, a blacksmith, a livery stable, the general store, a small hotel, a church that needed paint, and various other establishments that seemed to lean against each other for support. Beyond the town, the mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks white with snow that gleamed in the pale winter sun. The room above the store was barely larger than a closet, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook on the wall for her clothes. After Martha left her to settle in, Nora sat on the bed and let herself cry for exactly 3 minutes. She had learned long ago to ration her tears. Then she splashed icy water on her face from the basin, unpacked her few belongings, and went downstairs to begin her new life. The general store smelled of coffee, dried goods, and the kerosene from the lamps that fought against the winter gloom. Martha put her to work immediately, showing her the corner where she would do alterations and mending. A large basket already overflowed with items needing repair. "Miners are hard on their clothes," Martha said. "You'll have plenty of work, and there are orders for new shirts and such." The closest thing to a proper dressmaker left town last summer, married a rancher up north. Women have been making do, but they'll be glad to have someone with real training. Nora threaded her needle and began. The work was familiar, soothing, letting her fingers follow patterns they had known since childhood. She had always been grateful for her skill with needle and thread. It was the one thing about her that people valued without reservation. Customers came and went throughout the afternoon. Most ignored her beyond a brief glance. Some stared openly. She heard the whispers even when people thought they were being discreet. "Awful big for a woman, isn't she? Poor thing." Imagine coming all this way. Who's going to want her here? Martha better keep an eye on her around the food stores. The words stung like always, but Nora kept her head down and her stitches even. She had become an expert at pretending she did not hear, did not care, was not dying a little inside with each cruel observation. Late in the afternoon, a group of miners came in for supplies, their clothes crusted with frozen mud and their faces weathered by wind and work. They paid her no attention at all, which was almost a relief. She heard them talking about a cave-in at one of the claims, discussing timber and support beams with the casual familiarity of men who lived with danger. As the sun began setting, painting the snow outside with shades of pink and gold, Martha called her to the back room. "You'll help me close up, then come upstairs for supper. My husband will be back from his deliveries by then. You'll meet him and our son." Supper was a silent, uncomfortable affair. George Hendricks was as thin as his wife, with suspicious eyes that kept darting to Nora as if he expected her to pocket the silverware. Their son Samuel, a lanky boy of about 17, simply stared at his plate and said nothing. Nora ate the bland stew and hard bread gratefully, knowing she should feel lucky to have reliable meals, even if they came with a side of obvious disapproval. Over the following days, Nora settled into a rhythm. She rose before dawn, worked until late evening, and spent her Sundays at the small church where the congregation welcomed her politely while maintaining a careful distance. The whispers continued wherever she went. She learned the names of the worst gossips by listening to Martha complain about them. Vera Collins, the minister's wife, who made comments about gluttony in nearly every conversation. Dorothy and Judith Harper, sisters who ran the millinery and seemed to consider mockery a form of entertainment. Even some of the younger women, who might have been potential friends, kept their distance after their mothers warned them away. The only place Nora found any peace was in her work. Her skilled fingers produced beautiful, precise stitches, and soon she had more orders than she could easily fill. Women who whispered about her size behind her back had no qualms about asking her to alter their dresses or create new garments. The hypocrisy stung, but she took their money and did excellent work anyway. 3 weeks into her stay in Republic, the weather turned viciously cold. The thermometer outside the general store registered 15 below zero, and the wind howled through the streets like a wild animal. Martha fretted about the roads becoming impassable, worried about supply wagons not getting through before the worst of winter set in. It was during this cold snap that Nora ventured out to the mercantile down the street, carrying a completed order for Sarah Jensen, one of the few women in town who had been relatively kind. The cold hit her like a physical blow the moment she stepped outside. She had bundled herself in every layer she owned, but the wind found every gap in her clothing and turned her breath to ice. She was hurrying along the wooden sidewalk, head down against the wind, when she heard the laughter. A group of women stood outside the hotel, apparently on their way to some social gathering. She recognized Vera Collins's voice first. Good heavens, look at her waddling along like a bear in those layers, though I suppose she looks like a bear regardless. The other women's laughter cut through the wind. Nora kept walking, her face burning despite the cold. "It's a miracle the sidewalk holds her," another voice added. Dorothy Harper, Nora thought. "In this cold, you would think she would hibernate like the animals do." More laughter. Nora's eyes stung, and she told herself it was just the wind. Honestly, what was Martha thinking, hiring someone like that? Vera continued, her voice carrying clearly in the frozen air. "It's unseemly, and in a town this size where everyone can see. Some people have no shame about their condition." Nora stumbled, her boot catching on an uneven board. She caught herself on a post, her heart pounding with humiliation and anger. For a wild moment, she wanted to turn around and confront them, to say all the things she had swallowed down for years. But what good would it do? Their minds were made up. They saw only her size, never her skill, never her kindness, never the person beneath the surface they found so objectionable. She continued walking, delivering her package and hurrying back toward the store. The wind pushed against her, and the cold seemed to seep into her very bones. By the time she reached the store, she was shaking, though whether from cold or suppressed emotion she could not say. "You were gone too long," Martha scolded. "I need you to hem those trousers before their owner comes back." Nora nodded mutely and returned to her corner, picking up her needle with fingers that still trembled. She was so focused on controlling her emotions that she did not notice the man who entered the store until he spoke. "Afternoon, Martha, George. I need supplies for the lumber camp. Going to be a hard winter, and we need to stock up before the next storm hits." The voice was deep, quiet, with an assurance that made Nora glance up despite herself. The man was tall, perhaps 6 feet or more, with broad shoulders that filled his heavy coat. He had removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face that was more interesting than handsome, with strong features and eyes the color of the evergreen trees that covered the mountains. Those eyes met hers for just a moment, and she looked away quickly, returning to her hemming. "Kade Zeller, you have been up at that camp for weeks," Martha said. "I was beginning to think you all froze solid up there." "Near about," the man replied with a hint of humor in his voice. "But the cold's been good for the work. Trees slide easier on the snow. We've taken down some prime timber." "How many men you got up there now?" George asked. 15. "Would be more, but this cold is keeping folks close to town. Can't say I blame them. Lost 2 men last week. Decided they'd rather risk unemployment than frostbite." Nora listened as Kade Zeller listed his supplies and George began gathering them. She had heard about the lumber camps in the mountains, where men spent months at a time cutting trees that would eventually become buildings and railroad ties. It sounded like brutal, dangerous work, especially in winter. "You hear about the trouble at the Silver Queen mine?" Martha asked, clearly eager to share gossip. "No. Been out of town too long, I suppose. Cave in last week. 3 men trapped for 6 hours before they dug them out. One fellow's still laid up with a broken leg. People are saying the owners are pushing too hard, not supporting the tunnels properly. Greed will kill a man faster than cold or hard work," Kade said quietly. "A man needs to know his limits and respect them. Speaking of limits, how's that new horse working out?" "The one you bought from Preston. She's a good mountain horse. Sure-footed, strong. Exactly what I needed." Nora continued her work, but she found herself listening to Kade Zeller's voice. There was something calming about it, something solid. He spoke with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, yet without arrogance. When he laughed at something George said, it was a genuine sound that made her lips quirk upward despite her earlier misery. "That everything?" George asked, and Nora heard the sound of items being wrapped and boxed. "Yes, put it on my account. I'll settle up when I come down next month." "Fair enough. You be careful going back up there. Temperature's supposed to drop even more tonight. I'll make it before dark. I know these mountains." Nora heard footsteps approaching her corner and looked up to find Kade Zeller standing there, a heavy shirt in his hands. "Martha said you do mending," he said. "The shoulder seam on this tore out. Can you fix it?" "Yes, of course." Nora took the shirt, examining the damage. It was a simple repair, just a seam that needed restitching. "It will be ready in 2 days." "Obliged." He pulled some coins from his pocket and placed them on the small table beside her sewing basket. His hands, she noticed, were large and scarred from hard work, but his movements were careful, precise. Name's Kade Zeller, Nora Ashford. She met his eyes briefly, expecting to see what she always saw: assessment, judgment, quick dismissal. Instead, she saw only polite interest. "You're new to Republic?" "Yes, I arrived a few weeks ago, from back east by your accent, Boston. Long journey. What brought you this far into the mountains?" The question was casual, conversational, but Nora felt herself tense. How to explain? "Because I was running away from a life that had become unbearable. Because I hoped distance might matter more than appearance. Because I was desperate, an opportunity for work," she said simply. Kade nodded. "Well, you picked a cold winter to start. But the mountains have their own beauty if you can stand the temperature. You been up into the high country yet?" "No, I have not really left town." "You should when the weather warms. There's country up there that'll take your breath away." He smiled, just a slight curve of his lips, but it reached his eyes and made them warm. "Welcome to Republic, Miss Ashford." Then he was gone, collecting his supplies and heading out into the cold. Nora sat staring at the shirt in her hands, trying to process what had just happened. He had spoken to her like a regular person. Not with pity, not with judgment, not with the careful distance most people maintained. Just a simple, normal conversation between two people. "Don't get ideas," Martha said sharply, appearing at her elbow. "Kade Zeller's the most eligible bachelor in this territory. Owns that lumber operation outright, no partners. Good looking, good living. Every unmarried woman within 50 miles has set her cap for him at one time or another." "I was not getting any ideas," Nora said quietly, folding the shirt and setting it aside. "I was just being polite to a customer." "Good. Because a man like that, he'll end up with someone suitable, someone who fits his position. You do well to remember your place." Nora's hands clenched in her lap, but she said nothing. What was there to say? Martha was simply voicing what everyone thought. A man like Kade Zeller would never look twice at a woman like her. That brief moment of normalcy was just that, a moment, nothing more. But as she worked through the afternoon, she found her thoughts returning to the encounter. To the way he had smiled, the kindness in his voice when he welcomed her to town. Such a small thing, yet it glowed in her memory like an ember in the cold. That night, lying in her narrow bed, she could hear the wind howling around the building. The temperature must have dropped even further because ice was forming on the inside of her window. She piled every blanket she owned on the bed and curled into a ball, trying to stay warm. She thought about Kade Zeller heading back up into the mountains, to a lumber camp where men battled cold and danger for their livelihoods. She wondered if he was warm enough, if the camp had adequate shelter. Then she chided herself for such foolish thoughts. He had survived in these mountains long enough to build a successful business. He certainly did not need her concern. But she repaired his shirt with extra care over the next 2 days, making sure every stitch was perfect and reinforcing the seam so it would not tear again easily. When she finished, she folded it neatly and set it aside, wondering when he would return to collect it. The cold continued. Republic hunched under the assault of winter like a small animal trying to survive until spring. Wood supplies ran low. The doctor treated case after case of frostbite and cold-related illness. 2 elderly residents died, their bodies stored in a shed until the ground thawed enough for burial. Nora kept to her routine, working steadily through the piles of mending and the orders for new garments. The gossip about her size continued, but she tried to develop a thicker skin. She had no other choice. This was her life now, and she would have to make the best of it. Sunday services were particularly difficult. The small church was drafty, and everyone huddled in their pews trying to stay warm while Reverend Collins delivered a sermon about perseverance through trials. Afterward, the women gathered in small groups, talking in hushed voices. Nora stood by herself, as usual, waiting for Martha to finish her socializing so they could walk back to the store. "I heard the lumber camp lost another man," someone said. "Quit and headed for warmer territory. Can't say I blame him. This winter is trying to kill us all." Kade Zeller's having trouble keeping crews. He's been in town twice this week trying to hire, but nobody wants to go up into those mountains right now. He should shut down until spring. It's too dangerous. He can't. He's got contracts to fulfill. If he doesn't deliver, he'll lose his business. Nora listened, concern prickling at her. She had no reason to worry about a man she had spoken to for all of 5 minutes, but the concern persisted anyway. She did not see Kade again for another week. When he finally appeared at the store, she was startled by his appearance. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a gauntness to his face that spoke of missed meals and too little sleep. "Afternoon," he said to George. "Need more supplies. And I'm here to pick up my shirt if it's ready." "It's ready," Nora said quickly, retrieving it from her carefully organized pile of completed work. "I reinforced the seam and checked all the other stitching. It should hold up better now." Kade examined the work, running his fingers over the neat stitches. "This is fine work. Thank you. You look like you could use a hot meal and about 3 days of sleep," Martha observed. "Things that bad up at the camp we're managing, just working long hours to make our quotas." He paid for the shirt and his supplies, then hesitated, glancing at Nora. "You settle in all right, getting used to Republic?" "Yes, thank you." She was surprised he remembered their previous conversation, surprised he cared enough to ask. "Good, that's good." He picked up his packages, nodded to them all, and left. "That man's going to work himself to death," Martha said, shaking her head. "Pride will do that to a person. He should admit he needs to shut down for the season, but he won't." February arrived with even more brutal cold. The mercury dropped to 20 below, then 30. People ventured out only when absolutely necessary. Nora spent her days in the corner of the store, wrapped in shawls, her fingers sometimes too stiff with cold to sew properly. She had to stop frequently to warm her hands by the small stove. It was during this deep freeze that disaster struck at the lumber camp. Word came down to town with a rider who looked half frozen. There had been an accident. A widowmaker, a broken branch caught high in a tree, had fallen on one of the loggers. The man was badly hurt, and they needed the doctor. Dr. Morrison gathered his supplies and prepared to make the journey up the mountain, but everyone could see he was worried. He was past 60, and the ride in these conditions could be dangerous for him. "I'll go with you," offered James Preston, who owned the livery. "You shouldn't ride alone in this cold." Nora watched from the store window as they prepared to leave, and she found herself saying a silent prayer for the injured man, for the doctor, and yes, for Kade Zeller, who must be dealing with the crisis up at his camp. The doctor and James returned 2 days later, both suffering from frostbite but having successfully treated the injured logger. The man would live, though he would lose 2 fingers on his left hand. "It's bad up there," Dr. Morrison told the gathered crowd in the store. "They're working in conditions no man should have to endure. I told Kade he needs to shut down, but he says he can't afford to. He'll lose everything he's built." "Better to lose money than men's lives," Vera Collins said self-righteously. "He knows that, but it's not that simple. He's got contracts, debts, workers depending on him for wages. Sometimes a man gets caught between bad choices and worse ones." Nora thought about that conversation for days. She understood being caught between impossible choices. Her entire life had been a series of such traps. March came, but winter refused to release its grip. The cold continued, relentless and brutal. Supplies in town began running dangerously low. The road through the mountains was barely passable. People began to worry about making it to spring. It was mid-March when Nora needed to go to the mercantile for thread. She had run out of black, and she had 3 orders that required it. Martha was busy with customers and waved her away impatiently, so Nora bundled up and ventured out into the cold. The streets were nearly deserted. Smart people stayed inside, but Nora hurried along, head down against the wind, focused on her errand. She was coming out of the mercantile, thread safely in her pocket, when she heard the voices. A group of men stood outside the saloon, despite the cold. She recognized some of them miners and drifters who spent more time drinking than working. They were watching her, and their laughter carried clearly. "Lord have mercy, how does something that size even walk?" one of them called out. "Must eat her weight in food every day," another added. "Careful, boys, she might sit on you." The laughter was cruel, mocking. Nora kept walking, her face burning. "Just ignore them. Just get back to the store." "Hey, I'm talking to you, big girl." One of the men, emboldened by drink and the encouragement of his companions, stepped into her path. He was young, maybe 25, with a scraggly beard and mean eyes. "It's rude not to answer when someone speaks to you. Please excuse me." Nora tried to step around him, but he moved to block her again. "What's your hurry? We're just being friendly, trying to welcome you to town." "Yeah, we're real friendly," another man said, coming to stand beside the first. "Though I don't know what you're doing here. Shouldn't you be hibernating or something? It's cold enough." More laughter. Nora's heart was pounding now, fear beginning to mix with humiliation. The men were forming a loose circle around her, and while she did not think they would actually hurt her, their intimidation was deliberate and effective. "I need to get back to work," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "Work? What kind of work? Do they have you pulling wagons?" "You look strong enough." "Maybe she's planning to eat all the food in town, solve our shortage problem. Please let me pass." Nora tried again to move around them, but they kept shifting, blocking her. She was trapped, and people were starting to gather to watch. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. "You know, it's really something," the first man said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Coming out west where people are struggling to survive, where food's scarce, and you're taking up resources that could go to normal people. Seems selfish, don't you think? That is enough." The voice cut through the laughter like a blade. Everyone turned to see Kade Zeller standing there. He must have just ridden into town because his horse was still behind him, its reins in his hand. He looked tired and dirty from travel, but his eyes were hard as stone. "We're just having a conversation, Zeller," the first man said, though his bravado had diminished considerably. "No, you're bullying someone who's done nothing to you. And you're doing it as a pack, because not one of you would have the courage alone." Kade handed his horse's reins to a boy who had appeared at his elbow. He walked forward, and the men instinctively stepped back from his presence. "Miss Ashford, are you all right?" "Yes," Nora managed, though she was shaking. "These men bother you again, you let me know." Kade's gaze swept the group, his contempt clear. "You boys have nothing better to do than stand in the freezing cold making yourselves look small, because that's what you are right now. Small. Pathetic. Real men don't need to tear others down to feel big." "We didn't mean nothing," one of them muttered. "You meant exactly what you did. Now clear out before I decide to teach you some manners my father should have beaten into you when you were young enough to learn." The men dispersed, some grumbling, some hurrying away. The watching crowd also began to break up, the entertainment over. Nora stood there, still trembling, trying to process what had just happened. "Thank you," she said quietly. "No thanks needed." Those fools needed someone to remind them of basic decency. Kade studied her face. "Are you sure you're all right?" "Yes, I'm fine. They did not hurt me, not physically anyway, but the words had found their targets as words always did. Come on, I'll walk you back to the store. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, I want to. He collected his horse and fell into step beside her. His presence was large, solid, reassuring. People they passed gave them curious looks, but no one said anything. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Nora said after a moment. You're apologizing? What in the world for? For being the cause of a scene, for taking up your time, for Miss Ashford. Kade stopped walking and turned to face her. You have nothing to apologize for, nothing. Those men should be apologizing to you, though I doubt they have the character for it. Nora looked up at him, at his serious face and sincere eyes, and felt something crack in her chest. When was the last time someone had defended her? When had anyone ever suggested that she was not the one at fault for simply existing in a body the world found objectionable? I have lived with comments like that my entire life, she heard herself say. You learn to ignore them. You shouldn't have to. His voice was gentle now. And for what it's worth, those men are fools. They had reached the general store. Nora knew she should go inside, return to work, forget this conversation. But something made her pause. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why did you help me? Most people just look away. Kade was quiet for a moment, and she saw him considering his answer carefully. My mother was a large woman, he finally said. Tall, strong, solid. She could do the work of 2 men on our homestead. She hauled water, chopped wood, broke horses, built fences. She kept us alive after my father died when I was 12. And all her life, people made comments about her size, made her feel less than, made her ashamed of a body that was strong and capable and beautiful in its own way. His eyes met Nora's. She died when I was 20. Worked herself to death, really. And one of my deepest regrets is that I never told her enough how much I admired her strength. How grateful I was for everything she could do because of how she was built. So when I see someone being mocked for something that's nobody's business but their own, I remember my mother, and I can't stay silent. Nora felt tears burning behind her eyes. She raised a good son. She raised a son who knows that strength comes in many forms, and that judging someone by their appearance is the refuge of people with nothing substantial to offer the world. He smiled then, that small, warm smile that made her heart skip. You've got skill with a needle that this town needs. You work hard from what I've seen. You're polite and kind even to people who don't deserve it. That's what matters, not what some drunk fools think when they're looking to make themselves feel important. Thank you, Nora whispered. I needed to hear that today. Any time, Miss Ashford, any time. He touched the brim of his hat. I need to get my supplies and head back up the mountain, but I'll be back in town next week. If you have any more trouble from anyone, you let me know. Nora watched him lead his horse toward the livery, her heart full of something she could not quite name. Hope, maybe. Or the fragile beginning of belief that perhaps not everyone in Republic saw her the way she had been seen all her life. Inside the store, Martha was waiting with a sour expression. Making a spectacle of yourself in the street, and getting Kade Zeller involved. Really, Nora, you need to be more careful. I did not make a spectacle. I was harassed by drunk men. Well, you need to be less visible. Keep your head down. Don't give people reasons to talk. Nora bit back the angry words that wanted to spill out. What Martha was really saying was, don't be so obviously fat in public. Don't remind people of what you are. Hide yourself away so decent people don't have to look at you. She returned to her sewing corner and picked up her needle, but her hands were shaking too hard to work. She sat there, taking deep breaths, trying to calm herself. The ugliness of the encounter in the street ward with the unexpected kindness Kade had shown her. The world felt tilted off balance, and she did not know how to process it all. That night, she barely slept. She kept replaying the conversation, remembering the look in Kade's eyes when he talked about his mother. The next morning, exhausted but determined, she threw herself into her work with renewed focus. If Kade Zeller could see value in her, perhaps others could too. Or perhaps more importantly, perhaps she could see value in herself. The following week dragged by with painful slowness. Nora found herself watching the door, waiting for Kade to return to town as he had said he would. She chided herself for such foolishness. He had been kind to her, nothing more. She should not read anything into it, but when he finally walked through the door of the general store, her heart leaped in a way that had nothing to do with logic or sense. "Afternoon," he said to George, then his eyes found Nora in her corner. "Miss Ashford, Mr. Zeller." She tried to keep her voice steady, professional. "Do you have more mending? Actually, I was hoping to place an order for some new shirts. Working shirts, sturdy, warm. I need about 6 of them." "I can certainly do that. If you give me your measurements, I can start right away." "I'm not sure of my measurements. Could you take them?" Martha appeared, her eyes sharp. "I can do that, Kade. Nora's busy with, I'd prefer Miss Ashford do it if she doesn't mind," Kade said pleasantly. "She did such fine work on that repair, I trust her skill." Martha's lips pressed into a thin line, but she could hardly argue with a paying customer. Nora stood, collecting her measuring tape with hands that trembled slightly. Taking a man's measurements required getting close, touching him to position the tape correctly. It was normal part of her work, but somehow with Kade it felt different, more intimate. "If you could remove your coat," she said. Kade shrugged out of his heavy coat, revealing a blue flannel shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. Nora had measured hundreds of men in her career, but she had never been quite so aware of the process. She had to stand close to him, reaching around to measure his chest, his shoulders, his arm length. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and cold air, and she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You have any trouble this week?" he asked quietly as she noted down numbers. "No. It has been quiet. Good. Those men know better than to try anything again." "I appreciate your concern, but you should not feel obligated to watch over me." "I don't feel obligated. I feel inclined. There's a difference." Nora glanced up at him, confused by the distinction but unable to think clearly with him so close. She finished the measurements quickly and stepped back, needing distance. "I'll have the shirts ready in 2 weeks," she said. "No rush. Whenever you can fit them in." He paid her a deposit and collected his other supplies. Before leaving, he paused. "Miss Ashford, I wonder if I could ask you something." "Of course." "The camp's having a hard time with this cold. We're losing men who can't take the conditions. I'm trying to think of ways to make things more bearable up there. One issue is clothing. Men's clothes wear out fast in the work we do, and they can't always get down to town for repairs. Would you consider coming up to the camp, maybe once a month, to do repairs on site? I'd pay you well, and it would be a real help to the men." Nora stared at him. "You want me to come to the lumber camp, if you're willing. I know it's a long ride and the conditions are rough, but I'd make sure you were safe and comfortable. Well, as comfortable as possible in a lumber camp." He smiled. "The men would appreciate it, and honestly, it would help me keep my crew together. I would need to discuss it with Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks. They might not want me taking time away from the store. I'll talk to them if you like. I'm happy to compensate them for your time as well." Martha had been listening, of course. "That's very generous, Kade, but I'm not sure it's appropriate. Nora going up to a camp full of men. She'd be there during daylight hours only, and I'd personally guarantee her safety. Any man who showed her disrespect would be out of a job immediately." Kade's tone was firm. "It's a business arrangement, nothing more. Miss Ashford has a skill my operation needs. Nora's mind was racing. Going to the lumber camp would mean leaving town, seeing the mountains Kade had described doing different work. It would also mean spending more time around Kade himself, which filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. "I will think about it," she said carefully, "and discuss it with the Hendricks. Fair enough. Let me know what you decide." Kade tipped his hat and left. The moment the door closed, Martha rounded on her. "Absolutely not. You are not going up to that camp." "Why not? It's good money and Mr. Zeller has offered to make it worth your while as well." "It's improper. A woman alone with all those men." "He said I would be there during daylight only." "It doesn't matter. People will talk. Your reputation, my reputation." Nora felt anger rising. "What reputation, Martha? Everyone in this town already looks down on me. What exactly do I have to lose? Don't take that tone with me, girl. You work for us, and while you're under our roof, you'll conduct yourself appropriately." George emerged from the back room. "What's all this shouting?" Martha explained the situation. George listened, then shrugged. "If Zeller's willing to pay and it doesn't interfere with her work here, I don't see the harm. We could use the extra income." "George, be practical, Martha. Money's money. And Kade Zeller's word is good. If he says the girl will be safe, she'll be safe." Martha looked like she had bitten into something sour, but she could not argue when her husband had spoken. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when people gossip." Nora returned to her sewing, her heart pounding. She was going to do it. She was going to go to the lumber camp. The prospect terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Over the next 2 weeks, as she worked on Kade's shirts, she thought constantly about the upcoming trip. She had lived her entire life in cities and towns, never venturing into true wilderness. The idea of riding up into the mountains was daunting, but it was also the most exciting thing to happen to her in years. She poured extra care into the shirts, using sturdy fabric that would stand up to hard work, but cutting them with attention to fit and comfort. She reinforced the seams and added extra buttons. When she finished, she was proud of the work. Kade returned to collect them on a day when the temperature had finally climbed above freezing for the first time in months. The snow was melting, creating rivers of mud in the streets. "These are perfect," he said, examining the shirts. "Better than I expected. I'm glad you're pleased. Have you thought about my offer, about coming to the camp?" "Yes, I'll do it." His face lit up with a genuine smile that made him look years younger. "That's wonderful. When can you come?" "I'm heading back up tomorrow if you'd like to ride with me. We could make it a working trip and I'd have you back by evening." "Tomorrow? So soon?" Nora's stomach fluttered with nerves. "Yes, all right, tomorrow." "Good. I'll come by at dawn, dress warm. It's still cold up in the high country." That night, Nora could barely sleep. She rose before the sun and dressed in her warmest clothes, then added layers. She had never ridden a horse for any distance and hoped she would not embarrass herself. When she came downstairs, Martha was already up, her face pinched with disapproval. "I still think this is a mistake," Martha said, "perhaps, but it's my mistake to make." Kade arrived as the sun was painting the eastern sky pink. He had brought a gentle-looking mare for Nora to ride. "This is Daisy. She's steady and reliable. She'll take care of you." Nora approached the mare nervously. With Kade's help, she managed to mount, grateful for the side saddle that accommodated her dress. Once settled, she found the height disorienting but not unpleasant. They rode out of town as Republic was waking up. A few early risers watched them go, and Nora could imagine the gossip that would spread. But for once, she found she did not care. The rising sun, the fresh air, the sense of adventure, it all combined to fill her with something she had not felt in a long time: freedom. The trail led up into the mountains, climbing steadily. Kade kept the pace slow, mindful of Nora's inexperience. He pointed out landmarks and talked about the country they were riding through. "These mountains have been here forever," he said. "They make you realize how small and temporary human concerns are. Up here, it doesn't matter what anyone thinks of you. The mountain doesn't care, it just is, and you either learn to be part of it or you don't survive." "That sounds harsh," Nora said. "It is harsh, but it's also honest." "There's something freeing about that honesty." He glanced at her. "How are you doing? Need to rest?" "I'm fine." And surprisingly, she was. Her body was adjusting to the rhythm of the horse's gait. The cold air filled her lungs and made her feel more alive than she had in months. They climbed higher and the view became breathtaking. Snow-covered peaks surrounded them, and below, Republic looked like a collection of toy buildings. The world was vast and beautiful, and for a moment, Nora forgot all her troubles. "It's incredible," she breathed. "Told you." Kade's voice held satisfaction. "The mountains are worth the cold." They reached the lumber camp around mid-morning. It was larger than Nora had imagined, with several log buildings and equipment scattered around a clearing. Men were working, some cutting trees, others stripping bark and branches. The sound of axes and saws echoed through the forest. Kade helped her dismount and led her to one of the buildings. "This is the cookhouse. You can set up here. I'll spread the word that you're available for mending." Within minutes, men began appearing with clothes needing repair. Torn shirts, pants with holes, coats with split seams. Nora set up at one of the long tables and got to work. The men were mostly polite, some shy, a few bold enough to try mild flirting that died when Kade appeared and gave them a hard look. She worked steadily through the morning and into the afternoon, her needle flying. The work was satisfying, and the men's genuine gratitude warmed her. These were rough men, hard living, but they appreciated her skill and treated her with respect. During a break, Kade brought her coffee and a plate of stew from the cook. They sat together at the table while she ate. "The men appreciate this," he said. "You're solving a real problem for us. I'm glad I could help." Nora looked around at the camp, at the massive trees surrounding them, at the mountains beyond. "I can see why you love it up here. It's in my blood, I suppose. My father was a logger before he homesteaded. I grew up around timber and mountains, never wanted to do anything else." "It must be difficult running an operation like this." "It has its challenges, especially this winter. We've lost half our crew to the cold and injuries, but we're managing." He paused. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I saw those men harassing you in town, it made me angry in a way I haven't felt in a long time. Made me want to do more than just run them off." "Why?" "Because it's wrong. Because you deserve better. Because—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "Because when I look at you, I don't see what they see." Nora's heart was pounding. "What do you see?" "I see someone who's strong, who's survived things that would have broken softer people. I see skilled hands and a kind heart. I see someone who doesn't complain even when she has every right to." He met her eyes. "I see someone built for these mountains." The words hung in the air between them. Nora could not breathe, could not think. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. "You're built for these mountains." Kade repeated it softly. "Up here, strength matters more than appearance. Endurance matters more than fitting some narrow definition of beauty. You have both of those things. I've watched you. You don't give up. You keep going even when people are cruel. That's mountain strength." Tears were sliding down Nora's cheeks before she realized she was crying. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Kade reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, solid. "I just wanted you to know that someone sees you, really sees you." They sat there, hands clasped, while Nora's world realigned itself around this moment. Something was beginning here, something precious and terrifying. She could feel it taking root in her heart like a seedling pushing through frozen ground. A man appeared in the doorway, breaking the moment. "Boss, we've got a problem with the skid trail. Need you to take a look." Kade released her hand reluctantly. "Duty calls. Take your time finishing up. I'll come get you when it's time to head back." Nora returned to her mending, but her mind was far away. She replayed Kade's words over and over, turning them like precious stones in her hands. "You're built for these mountains." Could it be true? Could this body she had hated for so long actually be suited for something, somewhere? The ride back to town that evening was quiet. Both of them seemed wrapped in their own thoughts. But when they reached the general store and Kade helped her dismount, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Will you come back next week?" he asked. "Yes. If you need me." "I need you." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was significant. "The camp needs you," he clarified, though his eyes said more. Nora walked into the store feeling like she was floating. Martha's sharp questions about the day barely registered. She climbed to her small room, sat on her bed and pressed her hands to her heart, feeling it race. She was falling in love. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. She had never let herself feel this way before, had never believed anyone would want her. But Kade's words, his touch, the way he looked at her, it all suggested that maybe, impossibly, he might feel something too. Over the following weeks, Nora made the trip to the lumber camp regularly. Each visit deepened her connection to both the place and the man. Kade was unfailingly kind, but more than that, he treated her as an equal, someone whose opinions mattered, whose presence had value. They began talking during her breaks, sharing stories of their lives. She told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother's constant disappointment, about the boarding house and the creditors and the desperate need to escape. He told her about his childhood on the homestead, about his mother's strength and his father's death, about learning the logging trade and saving every penny to start his own operation. "I want to build something that lasts," he said one afternoon as they sat on a log outside the cookhouse, watching men work. "Something I can be proud of, maybe something to pass on to my children someday if I'm lucky enough to have them." "You'll make a good father," Nora said without thinking. "You think so, I know so. You're patient and fair, you care about your men, those are the qualities that matter. What about you? You want children?" The question caught her off guard. "I used to think about it, but I never really believed it would happen for me." "Why not?" "Because women like me don't typically get the chance. Men don't look at me and think about marriage and family. They think, well, you know what they think." "I don't think that." Kade's voice was intense. "When I look at you, I think about how lucky a man would be to have you. Someone strong and capable and good-hearted. Someone who could stand beside him through hard times and make them bearable." Nora's breath caught. "Kade, I know I shouldn't say these things. I know it's forward, but I can't seem to help myself anymore." He turned to face her fully. "Nora, I care about you. More than I should, probably, given we've only known each other a few months. But there it is. I care about you and I think about you constantly, and when you're at the camp, everything feels better, easier." "I care about you too," Nora whispered, "but I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of hoping too much. Of believing this could be real and then having it taken away." Kade reached for her hand. "I can't promise nothing will ever hurt you. Life doesn't work that way, but I can promise that I mean what I say. My feelings are real. And I'd like to see where this goes if you're willing." Nora looked at their joined hands, at his face, at the sincerity in his eyes. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to not believe, to expect disappointment. But something stronger pushed back. Hope. Fragile, terrifying hope. "I'm willing," she said. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good. That's good." From that day forward, their relationship shifted. They were courting now officially, though they kept it quiet at first. Kade would ride down to Republic on Sundays after church, and they would walk together, talking for hours. People gossiped, of course. Vera Collins made pointed comments about inappropriate matches. The Harper sisters snickered behind their hands. But Kade ignored them all. His attention focused on Nora. He brought her small gifts: a pretty stone he found in the creek, a bird's nest that had fallen from a tree, wildflowers when they began blooming in early spring. She sewed him shirts in colors she thought would suit him, added careful embroidery to his handkerchiefs, mended his clothes with extra care. "Martha thinks I'm making a fool of myself," Nora told him one Sunday as they walked along the creek outside town. "Martha thinks breathing too loudly is foolish. Her opinion isn't worth worrying over. But what about your reputation? People are talking about us. Let them talk. Nora, I'm 31 years old. I've spent the last decade building my business, working dawn to dusk, never making time for anything else. I'm not going to let fear of gossip rob me of the first real happiness I've found in years." When you put it that way, it sounds simple. Maybe it is simple. I love you. You love me. Everything else is just noise. I love you. The words hung in the air between them. It was the first time either of them had said it directly. "You love me." Nora's voice was barely audible. "I do. I love you, Nora Ashford. I love your strength and your kindness and your skilled hands. I love the way you never complain even when you have every right to. I love how you look at these mountains like they're something precious. I love—" He stopped, laughing a little at himself. "I could go on for quite a while, but you get the idea. I love you too." The words felt like a leap off a cliff, exhilarating and terrifying. "I love you, Kade Zeller." He pulled her close and kissed her there by the creek, with the mountains watching and the first flowers of spring blooming around them. It was Nora's first real kiss, and it was everything she had never let herself dream of: tender and passionate and full of promise. Spring progressed, and with it, their relationship deepened. Kade began talking about the future openly, about his plans for expanding the logging operation, about the house he wanted to build, about the life he envisioned. And in all those plans, Nora was there. "I want to marry you," he said one day in May. They were at the lumber camp, sitting on their favorite log during her break. "I know I should probably have a ring and make it more romantic, but I can't wait anymore. Will you marry me, Nora?" Nora's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? Truly sure? Because people will talk. They'll say you're making a mistake. They'll say, 'I don't care what they say. I care what you say. Do you want to marry me?'" "Yes. Yes, I want to marry you." He kissed her then deeply, and several of the loggers whooped and cheered from their work sites. Kade pulled back and grinned. "Guess we're making it official." They were married in June in the small church in Republic. It was not a large wedding. Kade had no family left, and Nora had no one but the Hendricks, who attended out of obligation rather than warmth. But several of the loggers came down from the camp, cleaned up and awkward in their good clothes, and their presence filled the church with genuine happiness. Vera Collins made a point of telling Nora before the ceremony that she thought the marriage was ill-advised. "I hope you understand what you're doing to that man's prospects," she said. "He could have had anyone. He chose me," Nora replied, her voice steady, "and I'm grateful every day for that choice." Kade looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world when she walked down the aisle in her wedding dress, a simple blue gown she had sewn herself. When they exchanged vows, his voice was strong and sure, with no hesitation, no doubt. "I promise to love you in sunshine and storm," he said. "In easy times and hard. I promise to see you always for who you truly are. I promise to build a life with you that's worth living." Nora's vows were simpler. I promise to love you with everything I am. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to never stop being grateful that you saw me when no one else did." The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Kade kissed her with such tenderness that Nora felt her heart might burst. The reception was held at the hotel, a modest affair with cake and coffee. The loggers were rowdy but respectful, toasting the newlyweds with enthusiasm. Even Martha managed a thin smile and a gift of kitchen linens. As the sun set, Kade took Nora's hand. "Ready to see our new home?" He had been working on it for months, she knew, building a house on a piece of land near the lumber camp. She had not been allowed to see it, had only heard his descriptions. Now, as they rode up the mountain in the evening light, her heart raced with anticipation. The house was perfect. Not large, but solid, built from the finest timber his operation produced. It had a big fireplace, wide windows that looked out at the mountains, and a bedroom with a real bed covered in quilts. "I know it's not fancy," Kade said, suddenly nervous, "but I built it thinking of you, of us." "It's wonderful." Nora walked through the rooms, touching the smooth wood, imagining the life they would build here. "It's home." That night in their new bed, Kade held her close. "Are you happy? Happier than I ever imagined I could be? Good. Because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." The first year of marriage was an adjustment. Nora had to learn to run a household in the wilderness, to cook on a wood stove, to preserve food for winter, to live with the isolation of the mountains. But Kade was patient, teaching her what she did not know, helping with tasks that were too difficult, never making her feel inadequate. She continued her sewing work, both at the camp and taking orders from town. It gave her purpose and income of her own, which Kade encouraged. "You're too skilled to waste that talent," he said. "Besides, I like that my wife is independent, makes me proud." The loggers accepted her presence at the camp completely now. She became a kind of den mother to them, mending their clothes, listening to their troubles, occasionally doctoring minor injuries when the camp medic was unavailable. They protected her fiercely, and more than one man found himself unemployed after making an inappropriate comment. In town, the gossip gradually died down. People got used to seeing Kade and Nora together. A few even began to treat her with genuine friendliness. Sarah Jensen, who had always been kind, became a true friend, visiting the mountain house occasionally for tea and conversation. "I'm glad you stayed," Sarah told her one afternoon. "I think you're good for this place, and you're definitely good for Kade. I've never seen him so happy." Life fell into a comfortable rhythm. Kade worked hard during the logging season, and Nora kept their home and worked on her sewing. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, talking about their days, making plans for the future. On Sundays, they would ride or walk through the mountains, exploring the country they both loved. The following spring, Nora discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first. Childbirth was dangerous in the best circumstances, and she was far from any real medical help. But Kade's joy was so genuine, so complete, that her fear gradually gave way to excitement. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We're going to have a baby." Dr. Morrison made the trip up to the house several times during the pregnancy to check on her. "You're healthy and strong," he assured her. "I've delivered hundreds of babies in worse situations. You'll do fine." Nora worked as long as she could, but eventually her growing belly made it difficult to ride down to the camp. She spent her days sewing baby clothes, preparing the small room off their bedroom as a nursery, imagining the life that would soon join theirs. The baby came in December, during a snowstorm. Dr. Morrison had stayed at their house for the past week, anticipating the birth, and his presence was a comfort as the labor pains began. Kade paced like a caged animal, desperate to help but useless in the actual process. "Go chop wood or something," the doctor finally told him. "You're making everyone nervous." Labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. But finally, as the sun broke through the storm clouds, a baby's cry filled the house. "It's a boy, doctor," Morrison announced, placing the squalling, red-faced infant on Nora's chest. A big, healthy boy. Nora stared down at her son, at his tiny, perfect fingers and his dark hair plastered to his head, and felt love unlike anything she had ever known. "Hello, little one," she whispered. Kade came in moments later, his face anxious. "Nora, are you all right?" "I'm fine. We're both fine. Come meet your son." Kade approached the bed carefully, as if afraid he might break something. When he looked down at the baby, his face transformed with wonder. "He's perfect. He's absolutely perfect." He touched the baby's hand with one finger, and the tiny fingers wrapped around it. "Hello, son. I'm your father." They named him Thomas after Kade's father. Thomas grew quickly, a sturdy, healthy baby who seemed to thrive in the mountain air. Watching Kade with his son filled Nora with joy. He was a devoted father, patient and loving, always making time to play or cuddle despite his long work days. "You're good at this," Nora told him one evening as he rocked Thomas to sleep. "I had a good teacher. My mother taught me that love is the most important thing you can give a child. Everything else follows from that." When Thomas was 6 months old, tragedy struck at the lumber camp. A chain broke during a loading operation, and several tons of logs shifted, crushing one of the workers. The man was killed instantly. His name was William Burke, and he had a wife and 3 children in town. Kade was devastated. He had always taken safety seriously, but accidents happened in dangerous work. Still, he blamed himself. He made sure Sarah Burke received William's full pay and started a fund to support the family. He also implemented new safety procedures at the camp, determined that nothing like this would happen again. Nora watched him struggle with the guilt and did her best to support him. "You can't control everything," she told him. "You do your best to keep people safe, but you can't eliminate all risk. William knew the dangers. He chose this work. That doesn't make it easier. No, but you're doing right by his family. That matters." The incident aged Kade in ways that had nothing to do with years. But it also made him more thoughtful, more careful, more appreciative of each day he had with Nora and Thomas. Life continued. Thomas grew into a toddler, then a little boy. He inherited his father's love of the mountains and his mother's careful precision with his hands. Kade began teaching him about trees and logging, while Nora taught him letters and numbers. When Thomas was 3, Nora became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in April, during the first real warm spell of spring. They named her Catherine, after Nora's mother, hoping to honor what had been good in that complicated relationship. Catherine was different from Thomas, smaller, quieter, more thoughtful. She would sit for hours watching her mother sew, her dark eyes missing nothing. By the time she was 4, she was making her own careful stitches on scraps of fabric. "She's got your gift," Kade said, watching Catherine work. "Maybe, or maybe she's just patient. She's like you. Observant, careful kind. Those are good things to be." The years passed. The lumber operation prospered. Kade expanded, hiring more men, taking on bigger contracts. They built an addition to the house, adding more bedrooms and a proper workroom for Nora's sewing. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, with enough money for necessities and a few small luxuries. Thomas grew tall and strong, working with his father during the summers from the time he was 12. Catherine continued her sewing, developing a skill that rivaled her mother's by the time she was 15. The house was filled with love and laughter and the comfortable rhythms of family life. In town, Nora's position had shifted over the years. She was no longer the object of gossip but a respected member of the community. Her sewing skills were valued, her opinion sought. When Sarah Jensen's husband died, Nora was one of the first people at her door with food and comfort. When the church needed new altar linens, Nora made them without charge. She had found her place, earned her respect, not by changing her body but by proving the content of her character. Vera Collins had died several years earlier, and without her poison spreading, the community became gentler. Or perhaps people simply grew up, learned better, realized that judging others was a waste of energy better spent on living their own lives. One evening, when Thomas was 18 and Catherine was 15, Kade and Nora sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. "Do you ever think about that first winter?" Kade asked. "When you arrived in Republic, sometimes, it feels like a lifetime ago. You were so brave, coming all this way, facing all that cruelty, never breaking." "I didn't feel brave, I felt desperate." "Bravery often looks like desperation from the inside." He took her hand. "I'm glad you stayed, glad you gave us a chance. I'm glad you saw me, really saw me when no one else did. How could I not? You were exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it yet." He brought her hand to his lips. "You're still exactly what I need." Nora leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder, listening to the evening sounds of their mountain home. Their children's voices drifted from inside the house. Thomas teasing Catherine about something, Catherine laughing in response. "We built something good," she said softly. "We did. We built something that lasts, and it did last." Thomas eventually took over the logging operation, running it with the same care and integrity his father had shown. Catherine married a young man from a neighboring town, a schoolteacher who valued her mind as much as her skill with a needle. They settled nearby, and soon Nora and Kade were grandparents, watching a new generation grow up in the shadow of the mountains. Kade's hair turned silver, and his face gained lines from years of sun and weather. Nora's body changed with age, as all bodies do, but Kade still looked at her the same way he had that day by the creek when he first said he loved her, like she was exactly what he wanted, exactly what he needed. They grew old together in their mountain house, surrounded by family and the land they loved. When people asked Nora about her life, about how she had found such happiness in a place that had initially rejected her, she always gave the same answer. "I found someone who saw me for who I was, not what I looked like. Someone who understood that strength comes in many forms and that the mountains don't care about your size, only about your heart. And once I believed that about myself, everything else fell into place." On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered for a celebration. The house was full of noise and laughter and love. After the meal, Kade raised his glass. "30 years ago, I married the woman I loved. Best decision I ever made. Nora, you've given me everything: a home, a family, a life worth living. You've been my partner through good times and hard times, never wavering, always strong. The town might have laughed at you that first winter, but I knew the truth from the moment I met you. You were built for these mountains. And I thank God every day that you chose to stay in them with me." Nora's eyes filled with tears as everyone applauded. She looked around at her children and grandchildren, at the home she and Kade had built, at the mountains visible through the windows. She thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 26 years earlier, expecting rejection and finding love instead. "I love you," she said to Kade, her voice thick with emotion. "Then, now, always." He kissed her gently, and their family cheered. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Nora and Kade sat by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. "No regrets?" Kade asked. "Not a single one. You? Only that I didn't meet you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had." "We have the years we have. That's enough. More than enough." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the mountains stood eternal under the stars. Inside, the house was warm with the memories of 30 years of love. Kade eventually dozed off in his chair, and Nora watched him sleep, her heart full. She thought about the young man who had defended her in the street that day, who had seen her worth when no one else did, who had loved her completely and without reservation. She thought about the life they had built together, about their children and grandchildren, about the respect she had earned and the place she had found. She had come to Republic expecting nothing and found everything. She had been mocked for her size, judged and dismissed, but one man had looked past all that and seen her true self. And his love had been the key that unlocked her own strength, her own worth, her own capacity for joy. "You're built for these mountains," he had said, and he had been right. Not because she was perfect, but because she was strong enough to endure, brave enough to hope, and wise enough to recognize love when it was offered. The fire crackled, and somewhere outside an owl called. Nora pulled a blanket over Kade's sleeping form and banked the fire for the night. As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, she paused at the landing window to look out at the moonlit peaks. "Thank you," she whispered to the mountains, to the life she had found, to the love that had saved her. "Thank you for everything." In the years that followed, Kade and Nora continued their life together in the mountains. They watched Thomas expand the logging operation, bringing in new equipment and modern techniques, while maintaining his father's commitment to safety and fair treatment of workers. Catherine's husband became the principal of Republic School, and she used her sewing skills to teach young women in the community, passing on her craft to a new generation. The grandchildren were frequent visitors to the mountain house, running through the rooms that had once been so quiet, filling the air with shouts and laughter. Kade taught the boys about logging and horses and the ways of the forest. Nora taught the girls to sew, but also to read and think and believe in their own worth. She made sure every one of them understood that they were valuable exactly as they were, that the world's judgments meant nothing compared to their own character. When Nora was 65, Martha Hendricks passed away. George had died years earlier, and Martha had grown increasingly bitter and isolated in her final years. At her funeral, Nora felt only sadness for a woman who had never learned to see beyond surface judgments, who had wasted her life measuring others instead of building meaningful connections. She was not happy, Nora told Kade afterward. "I think that's the saddest thing. She had so many years, and she spent them all being critical and cold. You're more charitable than I am. I never forgave her for how she treated you that first year. I forgave her long ago. Holding on to anger only poisons yourself. That's why you're a better person than me. No. Just older and tired enough not to waste energy on grudges." Republic changed over the years. The mining played out, and the town's economy shifted more toward logging and ranching. New families arrived, bringing fresh energy and ideas. The railroad finally pushed through in 1892, connecting the town more directly to the outside world. Progress brought both good and bad more opportunities, but also more outside interference, more regulation, more complexity. Through it all, Kade and Nora remained constants. Their mountain home became a landmark, a place where people knew they would find welcome and wisdom. Young couples starting out would come to ask advice. Neighbors in trouble would show up knowing they would receive help without judgment. Nora's sewing room became an informal gathering place for women, where they would work on projects together and share the burdens of their lives. When Thomas's wife died in childbirth, leaving him with 3 children to raise alone, Kade and Nora stepped in without hesitation. The children came to live with them for 2 years while Thomas grieved and learned to manage both his business and his household. Nora raised those grandchildren as she had raised her own children, with patience and love and firm boundaries. "You've been doing this for 40 years, Kade told her one exhausted evening after getting the youngest grandchild to bed. "When do you get to rest?" "When I'm dead," Nora said with a tired smile. "Until then, family needs family. We do what must be done." "You're remarkable. Do you know that?" "I'm ordinary. I just do what any mother would do." "No, you're extraordinary. You always have been." Catherine's family thrived. Her children were bright and curious, and 2 of her daughters eventually went to the new teachers' college that opened in Spokane. One became a teacher herself, the other a nurse. Nora was fiercely proud of them, of their education and independence. "The world is changing," she told Kade. "Women have opportunities now that I never dreamed of. Because of women like you who survived and pushed doors open for the next generation." "I didn't push any doors. I just lived my life." That's how most progress happens. One person living their truth, making it easier for the next person to do the same. On their 40th anniversary, the celebration was even larger than the 30th. The mountain house could not hold everyone, so they held the party at Thomas's place, which had more room. People came from all over the territory, former workers, neighbors, friends new and old. Even some of Nora's old customers from town, now elderly themselves, made the journey to celebrate. Sarah Jensen, now in her 70s and using a cane, embraced Nora warmly. 40 years. Look what you've built together." "Look what we all built," Nora corrected. "None of us do this alone." "True enough. But you've been an anchor for a lot of people, Nora, myself included. When James died, I don't know what I would have done without you. You would have survived. You're stronger than you know. So are you. Though I think you've always known your strength. Even that first winter when the town was so cruel, you never really broke. I bent pretty far. But you didn't break. That's what matters." As the party continued around them, Nora found a quiet moment to slip outside. She walked a short distance from the house, far enough that the noise faded to a pleasant background hum. The mountains rose around her, solid and eternal. She was 70 now, her body showing the inevitable wear of age. Her knees ached. Her hands, once so skilled with a needle, were stiff with arthritis on cold mornings. But she was alive, surrounded by love, filled with contentment. Kade found her there as she had known he would. He always knew when she needed him. "Hiding from your own party?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "Just taking a moment. It's a lot of people." "It is, but they're here because they love you, love us." 40 years, Kade. How did we get here so fast? By living each day as it came. By loving each other through the hard parts. By building something solid. Nora leaned against him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence. He was 73 now, his body also showing age. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who had looked at her on a frozen street and seen not her size but her worth. "If you could go back," she asked, "knowing everything that would come, would you still choose me? Every single time. In every possible life, I'd always choose you. Even with all the gossip and judgment we faced. Nora, that stopped mattering by our first anniversary. And it stopped completely when Thomas was born. Our life together, our family, the love we've built, that's what matters. The gossips are all dead or forgotten. We're still here, still together, still happy. I love you, Kade Zeller. I love you, Nora Zeller, now and always." They stood there together, watching the sun set behind the mountains, until Thomas came to fetch them back to the party. The celebration continued late into the evening, full of toasts and stories and laughter. 3 years later, Kade had a stroke. He survived, but his left side was weakened, and his speech was slurred. The doctor said he might recover some function with time, but he would never be the same. Thomas immediately took over full responsibility for the logging operation, and Nora devoted herself to Kade's care. The man who had always been so strong, so capable, now needed help with basic tasks. It was a difficult adjustment for both of them. Kade struggled with frustration and depression. Nora struggled with exhaustion and her own aging body's limitations. But they faced it together as they had faced everything else. "I hate being a burden," Kade said one difficult afternoon, his words slurred but understandable. "You're not a burden. You're my husband, the man I love. Taking care of you is not a burden, it's a privilege." That's the exhaustion talking. No, it's the truth talking. "Kade, you took care of me for 43 years. You defended me, supported me, loved me when the world said I wasn't worth loving. Now I get to return the favor. It's an honor, not a burden. Even when I'm like this, weak and useless." "You are not useless. You're still you. Still the man who saw me in that store and decided I was worth knowing. Still the man who told me I was built for these mountains. Still my husband, my love, my partner. A stroke doesn't change any of that." Tears rolled down Kade's face and Nora wiped them gently away. "We're going to get through this," she said firmly. "Together, just like we've gotten through everything else." And they did. Slowly, with setbacks and frustrations, Kade regained some of his strength. He never recovered completely, but he learned to adapt. He could walk with a cane. His speech improved. He could do small tasks around the house. It was not the life they had planned for these years, but it was still life, still together, still precious. They celebrated their 45th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family. Kade had insisted on going back to their mountain house for the day, even though they had been staying with Thomas to make care easier. "I want to be home," he had said, "in the house we built. Just for today." So Thomas drove them up, settled them in, and left them alone with promises to return before dark. Nora and Kade sat in their familiar spots by the fire, even though it was summer and they did not really need the heat. But the fire was tradition, was comfort, was home. 45 years, Kade said, his speech clearer than it had been in months. "More than I ever hoped for. We've been blessed. Do you remember that first night here, our wedding night, of course? You were so nervous, kept checking to make sure everything was perfect. I wanted it to be right for you, wanted you to be happy." "I was happy. I am happy. You've given me a lifetime of happiness, Kade." He reached for her hand, his grip weaker than it once was, but still warm, still real. "Thank you for loving me, for giving me this life, for being my wife. Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for loving me when no one else did." They sat in silence, hands clasped, watching the fire. Outside, the mountains stood watch as they had for millions of years. Inside, two people who had built a life of love and meaning sat together, grateful for every moment they had been given. Kade died in his sleep 2 months later, on a clear August night when the stars filled the sky like diamonds. Nora woke in the morning to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. He was 76 years old, and they had been married for 45 years, 3 months and 7 days. The grief was enormous, overwhelming. Nora felt like she had lost a part of herself, as if her heart had been torn from her chest. But even in the midst of pain, she was grateful. Grateful for every moment they had shared, every conversation, every touch, every quiet evening by the fire. The funeral was large, attended by people from all over the territory. Kade had been respected, admired, loved. Person after person told Nora stories of his kindness, his fairness, his integrity. And many of them also thanked her for her own role in their lives, for mending their clothes, for offering advice, for being a steady presence in an uncertain world. "He would have been nobody without you," one old logger said. "You made him better, made all of us better." "No," Nora said gently. "He was always good. I was just lucky enough to be there." After the funeral, Nora returned to the mountain house. Thomas wanted her to come stay with him, but she refused. "This is my home," she said. "This is where I belong. I'll be fine. Mother, you're 73 years old. You can't live alone up here." "I've been doing hard things my entire life, Thomas. I can do this too." He argued, but Nora was firm. She agreed to daily visits from family and neighbors, to a bell system that would alert Thomas if she needed help, to common-sense precautions. But she would not leave the house where she and Kade had built their life. The first months alone were the hardest. The silence was oppressive. Every corner of the house held memories. Sometimes Nora would turn to tell Kade something and remember with fresh shock that he was gone. But slowly, painfully, she adjusted. She kept herself busy with sewing, though her arthritic hands made it difficult. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of their grandfather, making sure they knew the man he had been. She maintained the house exactly as Kade had left it, finding comfort in the familiar routines. On what would have been their 46th anniversary, Nora made the walk to the spot where Kade had proposed, the log where they had sat so many times over the years. It was harder now. Her knees protested every step, and she had to use a cane. But she made it. She sat on the log and looked out at the mountains, at the same view she and Kade had loved. "I miss you," she said aloud, not caring if anyone heard. "I miss you every moment of every day. But I'm grateful. So grateful for the life you gave me, for the love we shared. You told me I was built for these mountains, and you were right. They've held me up, given me strength, just like you always did." The wind rustled through the pines, and Nora imagined it was Kade's response. She sat there until the sun began to set, then made her slow way back to the house. Nora lived 3 more years after Kade's death. She remained in the mountain house, growing frailer but never losing her spirit. She continued her sewing as long as her hands allowed, continued welcoming family and friends, continued being a source of wisdom and stability. On a cold November morning, Catherine found her mother sitting peacefully in her chair by the fire, a piece of mending in her lap, her eyes closed. She had passed in her sleep, just as Kade had, with no pain, no struggle. She was 76 years old, the same age Kade had been when he died. Nora's funeral was as large as Kade's had been. The church in Republic was packed with people whose lives she had touched. They buried her beside Kade on a hillside overlooking their mountain home, under a stone that read, "Nora Ashford Zeller, beloved wife, mother, and friend, built for these mountains." Years later, Thomas would tell his grandchildren about their great-grandparents, about the love story that had begun on a frozen street in Republic. He would tell them about the young woman who had come west expecting nothing and found everything, about the young man who had seen her worth when no one else did, about the life they had built together in the mountains. "They taught me what real love looks like," he would say. "Not perfect, but true. Not easy, but worth it. They showed me that the world's judgments mean nothing compared to who you really are, and that the right person will see you for your true self, not the surface everyone else sees." The mountain house still stood, maintained by the family as a reminder of where they came from, of the foundation Kade and Nora had laid. The logging operation Thomas ran eventually passed to his children, who ran it with the same integrity their grandfather had established. Catherine's descendants continued teaching, continuing to open doors for new generations. And in Republic, now a proper town with paved streets and electric lights, old people still told the story of Kade Zeller and Nora Ashford. They told it as a reminder that love can bloom in unexpected places, that true worth has nothing to do with appearance, and that sometimes the strongest foundations are built by those the world underestimates. The mountains stood watch over it all, eternal and unchanging. And if you walked the trails on quiet evenings, you might almost hear the echoes of two people who had loved each other completely, who had built something lasting, who had proven that strength comes in many forms and that the mountains don't care about your size, only about the size of your heart.